Hi there, my name is Niamh Mulvey and I am the author of The Amendments and Hearts and Bones. Um, I am going to talk about in this video, I guess, how I come to write the stories that I do write and how those stories tie into bigger issues and questions and, themes in, I guess, recent Irish history, particularly in The Amendments. So even though the main characters in the amendments are women, I wasn't thinking necessarily about a story about women when I came to write it. I'm driven by characters and how they feel in relation to other characters. That's always my motivation, and that's where all of my stories start from. And what I'm trying to do is, when I'm figuring out what to write about, is kind of find a dynamic between people, between characters that is kind of rich and complex or interesting enough to drive a story, whatever form that story may ultimately take. And I don't always know whether it's going to be a short story or a novel. In the case of The Amendments, that started off as a short story, and again, it was driven by just a connection between Nell, the main character, and another character called Martina, who is, I guess we can call her spiritual mentor. I don't know how else to describe her. She's quite a strange character. So that was the sort of dynamic that powered the first story. And when I wrote that, I sent it to a friend of mine, or sent it to a few friends, just to, because I felt it was a bit scrappy, but maybe there was something there. And a friend of mine said she quite liked it, but she wanted to know what happens in between. And in the version I sent her, we saw Nell as a teenager and then as a grown woman, and she wanted to fill in the gap. And it sounds kind of made up, but it was actually one of those moments where I was like, wow, to answer that question would require sort of really writing a whole novel. And I kind of just went from there, really. And I kind of, in order to figure out who Nell was, it seemed to me very natural to look to her mother and to see what kind of tensions kind of played out in her life, and what the dynamic between them, is about. And then the story really did veer a bit more towards that relationship between Nell and her mother, Dolores. And I think, in a lot of my stories, I am interested in this, in the feelings and the emotions and the emotional terrain between mothers and children, because I don't really think there's any more interesting or complex dynamic in all of human relationships, really. And in my first book, in Hearts and Bones, I didn't even notice that until actually thinking about this video, but it's all over it. Like there's mothers and daughters, there's mother and sons. And in The Amendments, it just gave me, a really broader scope to explore that theme and to think about, the tensions particular to each individual relationship. I kind of try very much to resist being too issue driven or led in my writing, because I think, I think you can think whatever you want about the world and have any ideology, but the minute you talk to anyone, it dissolves, because every single relationship and every single experience is just its own thing. And I love the way the unruliness of real people's lives just never fits into like theory. It just never does. Having said that, when I started writing about these connections between these characters, I was, and I always have been, just really, really interested in how quickly social change has unfolded in Ireland, in the last few generations. I think particularly between my generation and my mother's generation, I think we did sort of 2 generations of change in one, if not more. And that's just really interesting to me in terms of how those changes play out in relationships between people. And I try really hard to resist any kind of, I don't know, overtly sort of neat narrative about whether it's good or bad. It just is what it is. It's not for me. I'm a humble novelist. Like, what do you call them? Intellectuals and historians can argue about whether it's good or bad all this change. What I'm really interested in is how it feels. From what I observe in my own life and the lives of my peers, and then in the lives of women of my mother's generation, it's just a huge difference, you know, for women of, you know, women and men born in the, say, in the 50s and the early 60s. There was very little choice, you know, in terms of what you might do. Access to third level education was very restricted. People tended to come from really big families. You talk to any Irish person my age, and they'll likely have 6, 7, 8, 9 aunties and uncles. That's the average. And you know, to compare that to now, when we have much smaller families typically, and have much higher levels of education, and also in terms of the economic change is just kind of unprecedented. So yeah, those are the kind of changes that are very obvious and that everybody sort of knows about. And I'm just interested in the kind of granular feeling of those changes playing out between people in their relationships within their families. For my own life, I guess, as I said, I am really interested in just the rapid pace of all that change happening in this like really short period of time. So I've always been really interested in that, but I always kind of wanted to write this type of novel, this type of multi-generational kind of sweeping novel, but I never would have had the guts to do it if it didn't actually grow from a small thing, like a small little spark of this relationship that I was talking about a minute ago. Because I am really interested in history and in social change and that kind of thing. And again, yeah, just looking to my mother and grandmother's lives and experiences and just how incredibly different they were. You know, I think that's always been kind of in the back of my mind. I think as well, coming of age during the Celtic Tiger, which was this moment of, you know, very rapid economic growth in Ireland. You know, I was, you know, a kid and a young woman in those years, and just seeing it all happen, it was, you know, I really remember very vividly. I think I was in school, and our business studies teacher was like, yeah, the economy is growing. It's doing really well. And her kind of puzzlement and sort of surprise, and then that just whooshed along for the following, you know, 5, 10 years, whatever it was, and then it came to a halt. And yeah, it's just interesting to look at that and just to see how it played out. So yeah, that was definitely part of my inspiration for the book. So I kind of sometimes think of my book as a bit of a like unholy combination of Maeve Binchy and Kate O'Brien. So I think everyone knows Maeve Binchy. She, you know, was an amazing writer of big epic novels about relationships and families and women. And she, you know, has a very important part in the hearts of a lot of Irish readers. And then Kate O'Brien is someone people might not be as familiar with. She was an earlier author. She was writing like early 20th century, and she writes these incredibly intense and vivid novels about middle-class Catholic lives in the early 20th century, and they're all about God and nuns and families and how to live a good life, but in a very, very serious, intense novels that I absolutely love. And, you know, it's just kind of like the way some countries produce footballers. We just seem to produce novelists, and I think success begets success. So now when I talk to like sort of average readers who aren't really interested in sort of, you know, big theoretical questions, they're just more like looking for their next good read. I think the fact that there's been a lot of really good, juicy, interesting novels from Irish writers means that they will naturally then look to read more of that kind of thing. It might have something to do with the loss of the Irish language, and that, you know, that means, you know, we approach the English language with a little bit of skepticism, and I think, you know, and maybe we just have this inherent kind of distrust of language, which means we kind of play with it, which in turn leads to kind of this kind of storytelling impulse, or, you know, because if you look at like the great Irish, you know, of you know, titans of literature, they're very playful and have quite a suspicious kind of relationship with the English language, and that might be where that comes from. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Niamh Mulvey, and my book, The Amendments, is out now.